Boeing signed a contract to build the Air Force a fleet of tankers for $4.9 billion. It has since lost more than $7 billion. That is not a typo, and Boeing knows how to build airplanes. The whole $7 billion hole comes down to 2 words in the contract they signed. Professor Sorensen is here to help us think it through with you. By the middle of this, I'll hand you the one question that answers almost every procurement item on the exam. It is never which contract costs less. File that away, because it is the whole game.
The contract type is the answer. 9 times out of 10 on a procurement question, picking the right type is the correct answer, and everything else on the screen is noise the exam wrote to pull you off it.
We're deep in the process domain now. Task 5, plan and manage procurement. And the entire task turns on one question. Who carries the risk? Everything downstream, the type, the fee, the ceiling, the clauses, is just an answer to that. Walk back to Boeing with me. 2 words. Firm fixed price. They named a number and promised to hit it, whatever it cost them to actually build the thing. So when the real costs blew past that number, the Air Force did not pay a cent more. Boeing did, $7 billion, and their own chief executive called it a bad contract for a decade.
That's fixed price in one line. The seller eats the overrun.
And here's what makes it a perfect exam trap. Boeing bid aggressively to win the competition on a plane that still needed real development work. They promised a firm price on a design that wasn't done. Every experienced engineer in that room probably knew, and the contract still locked them into eating whatever it took to finish. That's not bad management. That's the wrong type for the maturity of the scope.
Then fixed price is just a trap. The buyer wins, the seller bleeds. Nobody in their right mind should ever sign one.
Fenrir, would you still say that from the buyer's chair? Because from where the Air Force sat, fixed price was a gift. They capped their cost on day 1 and handed Boeing every ounce of the uncertainty. The trap was never the contract type. It was signing that type over a design that wasn't finished, where nobody could actually price the risk they were promising to eat.
And that's the shift the exam is testing. A contract type is not a payment method, it's a risk transfer instrument. Every experienced PM comes in thinking procurement is about negotiating the lowest price and being tough in the room. The exam does not care about any of that. It hands you a scope and asks one thing: who should be carrying the uncertainty here? And the right type falls straight out of the answer.
The seniority almost works against you here. In the real world, you've bullied a vendor down on price and felt like a hero. On the exam, if you pick the answer that squeezes the seller hardest but leaves the risk in the wrong place, you get it wrong. It rewards the boring, correct allocation over the aggressive win.
And the tell in the question stem is usually the scope words. If it says well-defined, detailed specification, standard commercial item, the exam is whispering fixed price at you. If it says research, evolving requirements, novel, first of its kind, it's whispering cost-reimbursable. Learn to hear those words and half the procurement questions answer themselves. The other family flips it entirely. Cost-reimbursable pays the seller back for their actual cost plus a fee, so the buyer eats the overrun.
Then why would any buyer on earth sign cost plus instead of fixed price? Why volunteer to hold the risk when you could hand it away?
Because sometimes no honest seller can name a fixed price. Genuine research, a first-of-its-kind build, brand new technology, the cost is unknowable upfront. Force fixed price onto that, and a serious vendor does one of 2 things. They walk away, or they pad the bid enormously to survive the unknown, and now you've overpaid for risk that never showed up.
The buyer holding the risk is sometimes the smart move, not the sucker move.
Exactly. If the buyer is the one who understands the unknowns best, or the one who benefits most from getting it built at all, then the buyer holding the risk is efficient. That's the mature read. Risk should sit with whoever is best placed to manage it, and cost reimbursable is just the honest paperwork for that.
The real question is almost never who came in cheapest. The cheapest bid on the wrong contract type is not a bargain. It's how you buy a lawsuit and a schedule slip you'll be explaining for 2 years.
That lands the rule. Match the contract type to the scope and the risk follows.
Say it as a reflex. Tight, well-defined scope. Push the risk to the seller with a fixed price. Loose, evolving, unproven scope. The buyer has to carry it, and cost reimbursable is honest about that. The whole task is choosing where the risk lives.
One thing before we go deeper. Everything we drill on this channel you can practice free at certs.professorerica.com. Free practice questions and flashcards built for this exact exam. Go break your instincts there before the test does it for you.
The thing I keep circling back to on these is the part they never say out loud. On the exam, how do you actually know which contract type is the right answer?
So here's the fork that decides all of it. You're sitting down to sign. Is fixed price the safe one or the open tab? Quick honest ask while we are here. If this has been worth your time so far, hit like, then subscribe and ring the bell. I know everyone asks, but this one is free, and it is how a small channel like this actually grows. Neither safe is the wrong word entirely. The question is never which contract is safer to sign. It's who should be carrying the risk, and that answer changes with the scope. So here are the two families you have to know cold. On one side, fixed price. Firm fixed price incentive fee, and fixed price with economic price adjustment. In all three, the seller names a price, and the seller owns the overrun. On the other side, cost reimbursable. Cost plus fixed fee, cost plus incentive fee, cost plus award fee. In all three, the buyer reimburses actual cost plus a fee, so the buyer owns the overrun. Everything else you will ever read about procurement hangs off that one split.
Call it the risk handoff. Every contract type is just a different way of handing the overrun to somebody.
The risk handoff. I like that. And here's the cleanest way I know to feel it. Say you send someone to do your grocery shopping. Fixed price is handing them a set budget and saying, "Get me a week of dinners for this, no more." If prices jumped that morning, that's their problem, not yours. They keep whatever they save, and they eat whatever they overspend. Cost plus is saying, "Buy whatever we need, and I'll pay the receipt plus a cut for your trouble." Now every dollar of overrun is yours, not theirs. And time and materials sits in between. You pay them an hourly rate to shop, plus the cost of the food.
Okay, but what stops your cost-plus shopper from reaching for the expensive stuff every trip? Their cut grows with the total. One catch the grocery run hides. Unlike your shopper, a real cost-plus seller signs an obligation to control cost, and the fee can be tied to hitting targets. But you're dead right that the raw incentive points backwards, and the exam knows it.
So let me split the two families one more level, because the exam lives in the subtypes. Firm fixed price is the pure one number, the seller owns everything. Fixed price incentive fee shares the pain and the gain up to a ceiling. We'll do the math on that in a second. And fixed price with economic price adjustment is for long contracts where you fix the price but let it flex for something outside anyone's control, like a steel index or currency over a multi-year build.
And the cost side mirrors it. Cost plus fixed fee. The fee is a set dollar amount that doesn't move. Cost plus incentive fee. The fee flexes on an objective, pre-agreed formula tied to cost or performance. Cost plus award fee. The fee is a subjective pool the buyer hands out based on how satisfied they are, and that judgment is usually final.
So, said plainly with no groceries, fixed price, seller owns the overrun. Cost reimbursable, buyer owns it. Time and materials, a bit of both. Hold that, because it's about to decide a real dollar figure. Quick gut check before we do the math. How many contract types does the exam expect you to know cold?
3.
7. 3 fixed price, 3 cost reimbursable, and time and materials sitting in the middle. That's the whole menu, and the exam picks from it constantly, so the subtypes earn their flashcard.
Give me a real one then. What contract do you pick for a software build?
Which software build though, Fenrir? A fully signed off spec you could hand a stranger and they'd build the same thing, or something the users are still figuring out as they go. Because those are two completely different answers.
Signed off. Locked. Every screen drawn, every rule written.
Then fixed price, and you make the seller carry it, because you can. Fixed price done right is a beautiful thing. 6 companies took a fixed $48.9 million contract to build Hoover Dam, and delivered it roughly 2 years early because the scope was nailed down, the design was set, and every dollar they saved by finishing fast they kept. Locked scope plus fixed price equals a seller who is motivated to be brilliant.
And notice the incentive there is honest. Locked scope, so beating the cost is pure skill, not corner cutting on something still being designed. That's the version everyone should want.
Now the piece the exam loves to compute. Fixed price incentive fee. You share the overrun with the seller up to a ceiling, and above that ceiling the seller eats every remaining dollar alone. That crossover point has a name, the point of total assumption, and here's what it looks like on real numbers. Target cost, $2 million. Target profit, $200,000, so a $2.2 million target price. The ceiling, the most the buyer will ever pay, $2.45 million, and the share ratio on overruns, 80% buyer, 20% seller, until we hit that crossover.
Hang on, which number is the ceiling? You said 2.45, but the top of the card says target.
Good catch. Target price is 2.2, the ceiling is 2.45. The ceiling is the hard cap, the most the buyer ever pays no matter what.
And the point of total assumption is a formula, not a vibe. Ceiling minus target price over the buyer's share plus target cost. So 250,000 over 0.8 is 312,005 plus 2 million, call it 2.3 million, and exactly it lands at 2,312,500.
And past that number, the seller is on the hook for 100% of every further dollar. That's the whole reason fixed price incentive still keeps a leash on the seller. They know exactly where the sharing stops and the pain becomes all theirs.
See, that's my whole problem with cost plus though. There's no point of total assumption. There's no ceiling at all. It's just a blank check the buyer keeps signing.
It feels like one, I'll give you that. But cost plus incentive fee ties the fee to a pre-agreed formula, and the seller still has a signed duty to control cost. It's a check with a leash, not a blank one.
Fine. A check with a leash. I hate that it makes sense. Continue. It's the same reflex from the boxing gym, honestly. 3 nights a week, and the first rule anyone teaches you is you don't pick your guard before you see the opponent. Same here. You don't pick the contract before you see the scope.
And there's one more type I'm deliberately holding back, the one people misuse the most. Before this video ends, I'll tell you exactly when it's the right answer and when it's a slow motion trap. Different scopes, different tools.
Right tool, right job.
Okay, Professor Sorensen's still with us, and here's where the exam actually lives. Not in the acronyms, in one question. Here it is, the question I held back at the top. Who should carry the risk? Not who's cheapest, who should own the uncertainty. Answer that honestly and the contract type falls right out of it, every single time.
That's the unlock, but get it backwards, hand the risk to the wrong party, and the same rule runs in reverse and collects. I'll show you the reverse in about a minute.
And this isn't us reading tea leaves. PMI put the choice in writing in the exam outline itself. Read the enabler out loud, select preferred contract types. When a body writes an entire enabler around picking the type, that is the signal it's the skill being graded, not a footnote. And notice the task doesn't stop at signing. It runs all the way through managing suppliers and verifying the agreement is met.
That back half is where a lot of experienced people lose points. The task lists determine a negotiation strategy. Participate in negotiations, evaluate vendor performance, verify the objectives of the agreement are met. Signing the contract is the easy day. Holding the vendor to it for 18 months is the actual job, and the exam tests that you know the difference.
Watch the risk actually move as you slide across the types. This is the mental picture I want you to carry into the exam. On the far left, firm fixed price. The seller owns every dollar of overrun. Slide right through incentive fee and time and materials, and the risk shifts toward the middle, shared. And on the far right, cost plus fixed fee, the buyer owns all of it. Same project, same work, and you are literally choosing where on this line the risk is going to sit.
And notice where time and material sits, right in the middle. That's not an accident. You pay for hours and materials, so you carry the cost of how long it takes, but the seller can't inflate a fixed markup on a giant bill because there isn't one. Shared risk, which is exactly why it fits the small, undefined jobs and never anything.
The far right, though, cost plus. That's where buyers get robbed. Prove me wrong.
Sometimes they absolutely do. Look at the Titanic. Harland and Wolff built her for the White Star Line on a cost-plus arrangement. They spent whatever they needed and added a 5% commission on top.
Now read that incentive again slowly. The more it costs to build, the more the shipyard earned. That is cost plus percentage of cost, the single worst incentive structure in all of procurement, and modern rules ban it outright for exactly that reason.
And that's the exam distinction hiding in a famous ship. Cost plus percentage rewards spending. Cost plus fixed fee freezes the fee at a set dollar amount, so at least the seller can't grow their profit by burning your money. Cost plus incentive fee goes further and actually pays them more for coming in under target. Same family, 3 completely different incentives, and the exam will hand you a scenario and expect you to know which one aligns the seller with you.
Before we crown that, no PM should ever sign cost plus. The whole thing is a blank.
Fenrir. Wrong lesson. Cost plus percentage is banned, not cost plus itself. Cost plus incentive fee, with an objective formula, is exactly right for genuine research, where a fixed price would just be a comforting fiction everyone agrees to pretend is real.
The formula. Right. That one lands. I withdraw it.
And here's the reverse I promised you. The modern version, cost-reimbursable done completely honestly, and it still hurts. The Ford, the newest aircraft carrier, was built cost-reimbursable, and the price grew from about $10.5 billion. The exact number is $13.3 billion because the technology on it was immature, brand new, unproven.
And the Navy, the buyer, absorbed almost all of that. Not fraud, not a scandal. Just the contract type doing exactly what it says on the label. Fuzzy, unproven scope, so the buyer carries the risk. They chose that on purpose, because nobody could have fixed price technology that didn't exist yet.
Let me put a small human face on all of this, because it's not just battleships and dams. Picture a PM we'll call Whitaker, running an IT integration for a mid-sized firm. The scope was still half-sketched. Nobody had even mapped the old system yet. But the sponsor wanted a firm number on a page, so Whitaker signed firm fixed price to look decisive in the meeting. Then every discovery after that, and there were dozens, became a change order because none of it was in the original scope.
To look decisive. Oof.
And here's the part that stings. The vendor wasn't gouging. On a fixed price deal, anything outside the written scope genuinely is extra work they can charge for, so every change order was legitimate. By the end, they came to more than the original contract, and the relationship was scorched because both sides felt cheated, wrong type, on a scope that was never fixed to begin with.
So the fixed price wasn't fixed at all.
That's the exact shape of the Boeing tanker, just smaller. Fixed price on something nobody had finished designing. The type was fine. The scope was a fiction, and the fiction always sends its bill.
And let me be honest about my own number, because these figures move. Last time I taught this, Boeing's loss was over $7 billion. That climbs every couple of quarters, so let me not state it stale. Check me. Yeah. Another charge landed recently, so it's still north of $7 billion and quietly growing.
Which is the whole tell for the exam. When the scope is genuinely unknowable, forcing fixed price does not remove the risk. It just buries it in change orders and padded bids, and it surfaces later, always with interest. You match the type to the truth of the scope, or the scope collects the debt when you can least afford it.
Professor Sorensen, that risk transfer instrument framing is the single thing I want people to walk out of here holding. Thank you for that.
Glad to help.
$13.3 billion on a contract where the buyer agreed up front in writing to carry it.
Emma, before any contract type at all, there's a decision most people skip right past. Make or buy.
Right. First move in the whole task. Make or buy. Do we build this in-house, or do we go outside for it? And that's a real analysis, not a shrug. You weigh a handful of things. Cost, obviously. But also, is this core to what we do, or a commodity? Do we even have the capacity and the skill in-house? Do we want to depend on a vendor long-term? And do we want to hand a stranger our intellectual property? A cheaper outside bid can still be the wrong call if it means giving away the thing that makes.
Most people skip the whole analysis, though. They jump straight to picking a vendor because buying something feels like progress and building it feels like work.
And only if you decide to buy do the contract types even enter the room.
Exactly, you decide to buy, then you match the type to the scope. And that's where the type I held back finally earns its slot.
And the way you go get bids is tied to the type too, right? You don't send the same paperwork for everything.
Right. Well-defined scope where you just want the lowest price. You send a request for quote or an invitation for bid and let price decide. Fuzzy, complex work where how they'll do it matters. You send a request for proposal and wait the approach, not just the number. The document follows the scope, same as the contract type does. Which brings me right back to the type I held back.
Time and materials.
Time and materials. The right answer when the work is small, urgent, or you genuinely can't define it yet. Bringing in 2 contractors for a month. A bounded fix on a system that's on fire. Staff augmentation. You pay an hourly rate plus the materials, and you get moving today instead of spending 6 weeks writing a fixed spec for a 2-week job.
And the trap?
You let it run big with no cap, no ceiling, no fixed scope. The meter just runs and runs. It's fantastic for a week and a slow-motion disaster for a year, because nobody on the seller's side has any reason to hurry.
So put a not to exceed on it. Even T&M can wear a ceiling, and it should.
This is exactly why the exam cares who's watching the meter. You know the Pentagon's famous $435 hammer?
The gold-plated one, yeah, the scandal.
That's the myth, actually. It was mostly an accounting artifact, overhead smeared evenly across a pile of line items. Not a real $400 hammer, but the lesson underneath it is dead real.
On cost-reimbursable and on T&M, somebody has to audit what the seller bills. The ECO literally calls it evaluate vendor performance and manage suppliers. That's the whole back half of Task 5, and people forget it exists.
And it feeds back into the type again. On a firm fixed price, you're mostly checking that the deliverable meets the spec because the seller's costs are the seller's problem. On Cost Plus, you're auditing the actual costs line by line because you're paying them. Different contract type, different oversight job. The type doesn't just decide who carries the risk. It decides what you spend your management time on for the rest of the.
Procurement never met an acronym it couldn't nest inside another one.
And the task itself is really just 4 moves. In order, plan the procurement, including make or buy and the type. Conduct it, solicit and evaluate and award. Control it, manage the performance and the changes and the claims. Then close it out clean, verify and settle, and formally end it.
And do not sleep on close. On the exam, a contract isn't done when the work ships. It's done when you've verified the deliverables, settled any open claims, and formally closed it in writing. Skip that, and a supposedly finished contract can come back as a dispute a year later. Procurement closure is a real step, not a formality. And here's the ruling if you forget every acronym we said today. Match the type to the scope. It's the risk handoff, every single time.
The risk handoff. Fine. That's simple enough I might actually remember it in the room.
Let me leave you the drills, quick, exam style. Stable, fully specified equipment build, every spec locked and signed. Which type?
Firm fixed price, locked scope, hand the risk to the seller.
Second, a research effort where the outcome is genuinely unknown. Fixed price, cost plus, or fixed price and hope for the best.
Cost reimbursable. The buyer funds the discovery because nobody can price the unknown.
Third, 2 extra developers for 6 weeks to help finish a defined feature. Fixed price, cost plus, or time and materials.
Time and materials, with a not to exceed so the meter can't run forever. And here's the honest catch nobody says out loud. Fixed price protects the buyer's budget, sure.
It does. But watch what it actually costs you. Force fixed price onto fuzzy scope, and the buyer pays anyway, just in padded bids up front or a change order war later. Fixed price is never free. It only moves where the bill shows up.
So on a firm fixed price, if the seller's costs blow up, the buyer just reopens the price.
No, Erica, and that is the entire point of it. The buyer pays the agreed price. The seller eats the overrun. No reopening for the seller's own cost problem. That is what firm fixed price is for.
I restore old card catalog cabinets drawer by drawer, so of course I want the fixed, fully defined build, but only when the scope is actually that defined. That's the ruling, not my taste.
If you take one thing out of the door with you, take this. Match the contract type to the scope, and the risk follows it wherever it goes.
2 things to carry into the exam room. 1. Before you pick a type, ask who should carry the risk, not who's cheapest. 2. Tight scope goes fixed price, fuzzy scope goes cost reimbursable, and time and materials is for the small, urgent, undefined stuff with a ceiling on it.
And if you only ever remember one word out of all of it, remember the point of total assumption is where the seller stops sharing and starts eating alone.
If this made the contract type question finally click, hit like and subscribe. It's how we keep building this whole path to the exam, one task at a time. So here's the one I'll leave you chewing on. Which contract type has burned you in real life, and would the exam have picked differently? Study the mindset, not just the acronyms, and I'll see you at the next task.